Welcome to this episode of Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. And today, just want to talk about the British political spectrum, at least as I see it. This is a Rowan view. It is not the truth of the matter. It is not the considered opinion of every person who lives in the United Kingdom or any person who lives anywhere. It's just my particular perspective and how things seem to me. Now, most people, when they think of politics and political parties, tend to think of them in a kind of a linear sort of way. So there's a left wing, there's a right wing. The left wing has certain meanings, the right wing has certain meanings, and political parties are somewhere on the spectrum between the extremes of left and the extremes of right, or different politicians, even in their behaviors or their discourse, will be on the left or the right. And sometimes a person with an allegiance to the right can have a left-wing view about a particular subject, and vice versa. A person who is politically generally on the left can sometimes have a right-wing perspective on a particular topic or context. So human behaviors shuffle about along this spectrum. Our ideas shuffle about on this spectrum. Sometimes a person's ideology can differ to their behavior, and their behavior can differ to their ideology. So there's what we do, which is slightly different to what we say that we do. Yes, but I don't see it as just a linear kind of track or line that people are going along. I see it more like an ellipse. What I mean by that is this. So for me, this is like a stage in a theatre, if you like, and the middle at the front, and there's a middle at the back. And the middle at the front is where left and right bump into each other, moderate. And so where moderate right-wing politics meets left-wing right moderate politics, you in a sense have a social liberalism. This social liberalism can be defined as people who want to care for people who aren't their family, altruism, but also want to manage finances and manage the, I guess, utilities of life and things in as practical way as possible. So they're equally for compassion and finance. At the back, where left meets right in extreme politics, so you have extreme left meets extreme right, there's what used to be described as National Socialism. So one of the other names for the Nazi Party was National Socialism. If you think of certain brands of communism, like say Stalinism, for example, would also be something that could be described as National Socialism. And the behaviors of National Socialists are extreme. Whether they call themselves extreme right or extreme left, whether they call themselves communist or fascist, the result for large numbers of their own population, let alone the populations of other countries, seems to be very much the same. If you look at the amount of people that in their own countries that died under any country that's had a national socialistic authoritarian government since the beginning of the 20th century, you find the numbers are very high, from the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, to Stalin, obviously, Hitler, obviously, large numbers of people murdered within their citizenship and also outside of their citizenship as well. So those are the extremes, and of course, going to the left, there's left-wing politics, which could be described as politics of inclusion. And on the other side of that, right-wing politics, which could be described as politics of exclusion. So the politics of inclusion, I have a house and I want to include you in shelter and warmth and food. Politics of exclusion, I have a house and I don't want to share my food or anything warm or comfortable with you. You get your own. Those are the differences. So left-wing politics tends to lean towards altruism. Right-wing politics seems to lean towards what a friend of mine from Sheffield once described as the self-servitists. Altruism is an interesting thing. Um, Richard Dawkins, in his book, The Selfish Gene, published about 50 years ago now, talked about altruism and how altruism, the act of caring for somebody who you are not biologically uh, affiliated with, they're not a member of your family, is one of the things, excuse me, is one of the things that's enabled our species to thrive so well. I'm just going to take a drink. Hold on. Believe that's better. So, altruism, yes, it enables us to thrive. Um, One of the other uh, videos in this series looks at the neurobiology of altruism and the neurobiology of self-serving and finds that there are differences in the neurobiology between those two forms of behavior or human expression. But that's for another thing. For here, though, this is my mapping, if you like, of how I see this whole political spectrum. So, from left wing politics, if you go more extreme, there's socialism and communism, National Socialism. On the left, though, we have in its expression in the UK, Labour. There are different forms of thinking of Labour. Old Labour would be the traditional grassroots and ideology. The Labour Party, in a sense, is the political wing of trade unions. So once land was purchased and people were stopped using or having their own cottage industries and were being kind of shepherded into these compact forms of housing, which later became called slums, around mills and iron foundries and mines. Uh, this precipitated a necessity to get together to counter exploitation, and trade unions emerged out of that. And the Labour Party was formed to be the political wing, if you like, of the trade union movement. And I think I'm right in saying it wasn't until the 1920s that we had a first Labour Prime Minister. Um, Traditional grassroots and ideology, they're thought of as being trade unions. And so a lot of people on the right consider that anybody involved in Labour wants to have a return to trade union powers and 1970s industrial disputes. There's this notion on the left that compassion is more important than money. In recent years, there's a version or variation of Labour which could be described as Corbynism. Under Corbyn's leadership, the Labour Party became the largest political party in the whole of Europe, but turned out was unelectable in England. There's a reason for this, and that is that by about 1979, trade unions had so much power that they were bringing industries to a standstill, and the country had municipal workers' strikes. So even grave diggers were on strikes. There was no kind of refuse collection and things like this. And the Tories got in with a big majority with Margaret Thatcher at the helm. And they set to kind of dismantle the power of the unions, which they successfully did. Through the 1980s, there were disputes between trade unions and even the police being set against them. At one point in the early 1980s, the newly the new club that we joined, the EEC, this European Union Commission thing, was frowned upon by the left. They didn't trust it, they didn't like it, and they saw it as a European business club, as it were. But I think it was either 1981 or 1982 at a trade union congress, the head or chair or commissioner of the European Union was invited to speak. And when they walked on the stage, they were met with boos and disdain. But this person said something. He said, "You need us. Your power has been diminished. You are losing your rights. We are now the keeper of workers' rights. If we are now the people who make sure that you get, maternity leave and tea breaks and things like that." And so Labour started to understand that in this new world, they needed this protection of the EU because Margaret Thatcher did what an dear old friend of mine said was her masterstroke. She enabled people to purchase their council houses. And in one fell swoop, people became Tories overnight because they now had a mortgage. And so they started to vote in order to manage that. And they changed from being working class in a council house to being a homeowner with a mortgage. And ever since then, one of the only reasons that Labour has got in power is because of the Scottish vote. Um, for a strange thing that the Scottish National Party are a left-wing nationalist party. Most nationalist parties are right-wing, but they're very socialist in Scotland. So um, under Corbyn, suddenly there was a socialist Labour Party again, and a lot of people on the left were absolutely delighted with this. At last, a socialist leader for our socialist Labour Party, because the new Labour seemed to be further to the right than what a lot of people liked. But there's a problem, and that is that the English are largely Tory in their voting. That's where they kind of lie. You know, they've got mortgages and things now. They've got their own self things to look after. And so with the SNP climbing in Scotland, reducing the Labour vote, there aren't enough votes in England for the Labour Party to get in, which is why 2024 was such a surprise. The SNP are mentioned already, the Scottish Nationalist Party. They're considered to be left-wing and socialist. There's no prescription payments. You don't have to pay a parking fee if you go to visit a relative in hospital. Marvellous. Uh, the Greens. The Greens, in a sense, are apolitical in a way because they're about green issues, which is affecting everybody because we all live on the planet. You know, they're more of a general political perspective. They want to fix the whole of humanity in every nook and cranny of the world as a ethos. However, when they talk, the way that they think about things, they're in a socialist perspective. They're altruistic. They want people to be housed, to be held, to be fed, to be looked after. You know, vulnerable elderly people who are disaffected to become engaged again. You know, so whether they describe themselves as socialist or not, their rhetoric seems to be left wing. The Lib Dems, um, although technically the Lib Dems are in the centre, a lot of their grassroots are left leaning. You know, altruism's a big thing for them. The idea that you can help another rather than just walk past them if they need a hand. UK government at the moment under Keir Starmer, it seems like Starmerism is a bit like Blairism. Some people are calling it Blue Labour. There's the PLP, which is the Parliamentary Labour Party. So again, you've got the grassroots of Labour, the membership of the party being quite left, and then you've got the parliamentarians, the people, you know, the MPs that have voted to be our representatives, behaving more right wing than the membership of the party wants them to be. So sometimes there's a dispute between what the membership want and what the ministers of the government say they can do. I think this is just obviously a personal opinion. You know that because I said the word I think at the beginning of it. To me, it seems that because left to its own devices, the English will largely vote for a right wing party because they're self serving. The only way that a Labour Party can get any traction in votes is to tip a hat towards social liberalism, to tip a hat towards finance, to befriend business, to befriend people's personal finances. So instead of, the grassroots tax the rich version, they're hold on a minute. We need to give value to business. We need to encourage investment and that kind of thing. So, although it's unpopular amongst party members and sometimes is actually seen as anti-Corbynism, in a sense, Starmer is taking a leaf out of the New Labour book and kind of moving towards the centre in an attempt or an effort to kind of connect with disaffected English Tory voters so that Labour can have some power. And by some power, I don't mean have their hands on the reins of power, but be able to function within it, you know, to be able to reduce the amount of pain that the general population have, not to go full all out socialist, but kind of a bit socialist. So it's more socialist than it otherwise would have been, as a kind of a second best, if you like. That's how it seems to me. And of course, the act of doing that means that the people on the right wouldn't be happy about that because it's gone a bit left. The people on the left aren't happy about that because it seems a bit too much, too far to the right. Is it better? Is it better to have some altruism rather than none? There's the thing. So that seems to be, to me, what's happening on the left, and it splits the left, which it has. Corbyn is now in. There's a Corbyn party now called Your Party. They haven't made any traction yet in polls, as far as I'm aware. But the night is young. We've still got another 3 or 4 years to go before the next election. I think it's the 3.5 actually. The Green Party, they're making ripples in the polls. They've won a by-election, which is a big thing for the Green Party to do that. That shows that they are in an ascendancy. This means, of course, that their leader is now under scrutiny, and the right-wing press are doing their best to find anything that they can use to disparage him, which is what the right-wing press do to anyone who isn't one of their champions. And of course, a lot of the British newspapers are owned by foreign persons who have money invested abroad, and they make a lot of money out of telling British voters what to do. Yes. In the middle, there's the Liberal Democrats' ideology, which is perfectly balanced on the fence, in the middle, as it were. Yes, the Socialist Workers' Party, if you like, are the representatives of a more extreme version of socialism, not so extreme that it's communist, but it's sort of on the way. And then, of course, the Communist Party representing communism itself. On the right, the Conservatives, or the Tories, their tradition are often called the rank and file. They're perceived to be toffs and old money. There's the backbenchers, the general MPs, not the ministers who are in the cabinet or the government, but the general MPs have their own gang, if you like, that are called the 1922 Backbench Members Committee. And they can sometimes act like a voting bloc within the Tories themselves, in the Tory party. And that can mean they support or even, rebel against whoever's in charge. So they can create problems for the Tory leadership, and they can sometimes have great sway over what the Tory leadership can or cannot do. In a sense, generally, the Conservatives are more in favour of money than compassion, generally, in the way that they behave. A lot of compassionate Tories would argue with that statement. But then when you look at overall what takes place when Tories are in power, when Margaret Thatcher was in power, she sold off a lot of the family silver, as it were. A lot of British utilities became private companies and they've been trashed. Our waterways are disgusting, literally. It would cost far too much money to buy it all back. Labour have a policy at the moment that any independent private train company whose contract runs out, the government would then overtake it. So there's a gradual renationalisation of the railways. Other people think there should be much more than that, like energy, and the waterways, certainly. The NHS is obviously still a socialist institution, started by the Labour Party, detested by the Tories or the right wing. But before you start screaming, I'm not that extreme, hold on. Or before you start screaming, oh, that's a bit mild. Wait a minute, there's more. Thatcherism is a brand of Toryism that is held aloft with twinkly eyes, and people, loved Maggie. She's like a ghost that casts its shadow over the Tory party for many decades and still does. Very popular in England. Tory opposition at the moment. Badenoch is in charge. These are perceived as the self-servitists. They have untouchable wealth. They also seem to be incompetent and untrustworthy. There are, within some of their policy making, if you look at their educational policies, there were hints of eugenics, especially when Gove was in charge. They're anti-immigration, and of course, the left make a joke of their Tory leader's name because you can look at Badenoch and mispronounce it as Bad Enoch, which suggests a rather poor version of a racist politician who was called Enoch Powell. He did a speech once about immigration, and there was a famous speech in which he said there would be rivers of blood. Now, that's known as the rivers of blood speech. And if you refer to that, then you're immediately slammed for being a racist. But I hope that doesn't take place here because I'm just quoting and illustrating rather than parading or waving a partisan flag. Compassionate conservatism. There was a politician who became Prime Minister called David Cameron. He described what he did as compassionate conservatism. It was under his flag that the politics of austerity were done, the closing of libraries, which the playwright Alan Bennett called child abuse, and I agreed with that because it shut down poor people's access to information and knowledge. I've got 2 master's degrees, and I had a very poor education. In fact, I didn't go half the time. I was an undiagnosed autistic person with disabled parents. So I missed a lot of school, left school with nothing, went straight into a factory working at the age of 16. Classic thing. When my mum died, my dad left, abandoned me. I was unemployed and unemployable through my 20s. And I used to go to the library and read a lot. I read about French Revolution, Spanish Revolution, Spike Milligan poetry, just whatever I caught my interest. And by the time I was about 27, I'd kind of taught myself enough that I started to do therapeutic work. I was introduced to someone and I got a class together for this chap who was teaching neuroholistic therapy. I became a practitioner, then a master practitioner and a trainer of neuroholistic therapy because we were doing lots of exchange and helping each other. We became firm friends until he died 20 years later. And that enabled me to one day walk into a university without any A levels or degrees, anything, and convince the head of a new department that I could do a master's degree. So I was accepted. I did a master's degree from a standing start without any prior education really at all. No A levels, no degree. I didn't even know what referencing was, right? I had to be taught how to do that by one of the tutors. And I ended up using the tools that I'd been teaching on myself. I got a distinction for the dissertation and came out with an MA, a Master of Arts. And then 3 years later, I saw an advertisement for therapists who don't have a psychology degree. It's a Master of Science in Psychosocial Studies for therapists who don't have a psychology degree. So I applied, I got interviewed, I told them how I'd managed to self-teach myself through the previous masters, and they said, we'll give you a try. and I passed with flying colours. I got a distinction for the degree overall. So now I have two master's degrees, and all of that is because I had access to libraries. And under Cameron's premiership, libraries were closed to save money. The blame for the economic crisis was laid at the feet of the poorest in society. They started to cause such despair amongst the disabled community and fear amongst the disabled community that I know disabled people who felt that having had their mobility scooters taken away, they were under house arrest. That's exactly how they felt. And one person wrote to me saying, I'm terrified of my neighbours because my neighbours have voted for these people. Yes. On the other hand, gay marriage became a legal phenomena under Cameron's premiership. Brexit happened as well, and then he ran away. Lib Dem MPs, some of them can be considered to be a light alternative to Tories. They're also considered to be treacherous and untrustworthy because of student tuition fees. They can seem to be ineffective. So, there's sometimes a protest vote. No one believes that they would get in. But in 2024, they now have more MPs than they've had for about 100 years. Their leader at the moment is a carer, and he was a child carer as well. He's got a disabled son, I think it is. And so they are championing care for the carers, which I wholeheartedly would endorse. Further extreme than the Tories, if we fly our way up, the Liberal Democrats' ideology, like I mentioned there in the beginning, in the middle, sorry, reform are more right wing than the Tories. They used to be called the UKIP. They used to be called the Brexit Party. The latest label is Reform. Basically, this is the Farage camp. They're not as far right wing as some are. Further right wing would be the BNP, the EDL, English Defence League. There used to be the National Front. Before that, there was column 88. Eighth letter of the alphabet is H, so 88 is Heil Hitler. In between these two, of course, there's now someone who I think he was kicked out of Reform, and he's become Restore, and they're even more extreme than these people. Yes, and of course, if you float all the way around into the extremes, you get to the Nazi Party, and this is the whole thing. So this is what the British political spectrum looks like to me. Yes, I hope that I've described it as articulately and clearly as possible. And if there's any sense of bias on my part, then in a way I apologize for that, but in another way I can't apologize for that because I'm not a machine, I'm a human being, and I have leanings towards, the left because I care about people and social justice is important to me, although I would say I have never been a member of any political party. So I'm not a card carrying member of any political party at all. The way that I vote obviously is private, but it's also inconsistent as well. So I don't just vote Labour all the time as some kind of habit. That's not the case. I would say I won't say who I voted for, but I would say who I've never voted for. I've never voted for the Tories, right? But whatever's left on the shelf, one that I did vote for a long, long time ago, more than 30 years ago, there was a party that was started by George Harrison called the Natural Law Party. And I really liked some of their ideas. They were short lived, but yeah, I like their ideas. There's something else that I've noticed as well. This is just an observation. It's a bit of a fun observation in a way, but I just noticed the pattern, right? In British society, you could say that, Brexit produced or created a schism in the British psyche, the Remainers and the Leavers, and, never the twain shall meet, and they all detest each other. But that isn't new for this island. We had a schism before. We had a civil war, the Roundheads and Cavaliers, those for the king and those for Parliament, those for singing Christmas carols and having mince pies, and those very much against singing carols and Christmas pies. So, in a sense, Cavaliers become almost like an emblem or a symbol of carefree fun and having a laugh. And Roundheads have become a symbol for being stuck in the mud and not very happy, a bit grumpy and a bit jobs worth, but also very meticulous about what they do and sticking completely to the letter of the word of everything. So, if you want air traffic control, you need a roundhead doing that. And if you want a nice mural to be painted, then you want somebody who's a bit more cavalier, right? So depending on context, a cavalier attitude or approach to life is extremely useful in certain contexts, and a roundhead approach to life is extremely useful in other contexts. And I noticed something, and that is, when I'd been teaching around 2009, I realized not only had I been teaching people for 30 years, I had also been political for that length of time for 30 years as well. Because the first time I ever voted was in 1979 in a local election. And I thought, oh, if my political life was a planet orbiting the sun, it would have done a complete Saturn cycle of 29 and a half years. And so I thought, so I looked back at my political life, as it were, and I kind of noticed something. Right? When I began my political life, it was just at the beginning of Margaret Thatcher's premiership. And she was taught by the media people, Saatchi and Saatchi. They told her to lower her voice so she had more depth and persuasion in her intonation. They also told her to tilt her head on one side when she was talking with journalists. Because if someone's talking to you and you tilt your head on one side, you look like a bird that's interested. Oh, right. Oh, oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You might be going, what's this idiot on about inside your head? But now you're listening, right? And other media things. So she was the first prime minister that I know of that was media coached, right? She was followed by John Major. Nah, he was such a straightforward guy. We didn't know that he was seeing Edwina. Remove those pictures from your mind immediately. We just thought it was, cricket on the green. And, the satirical program Spit and Image even made fun of him by having him always grey, talking about moving peas around on a plate as if he was dull as anything. Next person to come along, Tony Blair, with his persuasive hands and interested forehead, the way that he would talk, and he was obvious, media trained. And after him, Gordon Brown. Straightforward, tell it like it is, no razzmatazz. Gordon Brown, who's good enough with the finance that just before the coalition, Gordon Brown was getting us out of the mess, and other countries were copying his model of how to deal with the global crash. You may not remember that, but we were actually in a better place, you know. Still, turns out now that Mandelson had some kind of fiddling about in the background of all that. Anyway, that's to be revealed later, I guess. Yes. So after Gordon Brown, there's Airbrush, Call Me Dave. Right? Do you remember David Cameron had these big posters, these big billboards, and he was all airbrushed out, so he had no pock marks or blemishes or any lines. Yeah. And after him, there was Theresa May. She was asked what naughty thing she'd done as a child. What naughty thing have you done, Theresa? And all she could come up was one day she ran through a field of wheat. She had a go at dancing at a conference, and Yes, didn't necessarily look very cool on the dance floor. Boris next with crazy hair, party down Boris, followed by Liz Truss, yes, who didn't have enough charisma to outlive a lettuce. Who's followed by someone with slick hair going everywhere by helicopter? Who's been followed by an adenoidal ex head of the Crown Prosecution Service, who's a human rights lawyer, who, one of his first ever jobs as a human rights lawyer, was defending a person in Salisbury who is known by the name of King Arthur and went to the court at Strasbourg and managed to secure, through human rights intervention, permission for druids to go into Stonehenge on the solstices and equinoxes. So if you've ever gone to Stonehenge on a solstice or an equinox since 1988, the reason that you are able to do that is because Keir Starmer, as a young man, opened the door. Well, there you go. But in the Roundhead Cavalier, Roundhead Cavalier, Cavalier, Roundhead sequence, there's Maggie, Media, Cavalier. Next one, John Major, Roundhead. Next one, Tony Blair, Cavalier. Next one, Gordon Brown, Roundhead. Next one, Cameron, Cavalier. Next one, Theresa May, definitely Roundhead. Next one, Boris, definitely Cavalier. Next one, Liz Truss, Roundhead. Couldn't outlive a lettuce. Next one, Helicopter Sunak, Cavalier. Next one, Starmer, Roundhead. Which suggests that the next British Prime Minister will have flair, be a media person, and be able to enchant with their charisma. That doesn't mean they have substance or they're any good. They can just enchant with their charisma. That's the suggestion. Now, we don't know, of course, how long Starmer will be leader for. His premiership might just be this term. It might be 2 terms. It might be 3 terms. I got a feeling 3 is the max. But what's after that? Who knows? We don't know where the political sea is going to go over the next 3 years. You know, they say a week's a long time in politics, 3 years is a very long time in politics, and 3.5 years even more. So, yeah, there's time enough yet for things to change. But at this point, on Friday, the 13th of March, 2026, that's how the whole of it kind of seems to me. And I hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you very much indeed, and take good care. Bye.